Welcome to DialogueWORKS, recipes for conversations that work. Improving employee performance. Providing effective feedback is the key to improving employee performance. Poor performance usually shows up as a lack of quality, quantity, or inappropriate behavior utilized to achieve results. If individuals don't receive constructive feedback about their work, nothing changes, and individual performance usually stays the same. Individuals just assume that no news is good news. Providing timely and respectful feedback is the key to improving employee performance. Consequently, addressing gaps in performance will increase individual and team accountability, your effectiveness as a leader, and the achievement of the results you desire. Before applying the DialogueWORKS process to improving employee performance, there are a number of cues that will help you to hold an effective feedback conversation. First, avoid the feedback sandwich. In the past, individuals have been admonished to say something positive or good before providing negative feedback, and then to end the conversation on a positive note. This is a recipe for disaster. The good initial feedback becomes a setup for the negative message that follows. Recipients of such good feedback learn to discount or ignore the positive, even if true, because they come to expect the negative that follows. Recipients come to see this type of feedback as manipulative and lacking sincerity. Using the feedback sandwich to hold this conversation can create defensiveness and disbelief before the constructive feedback is even delivered, making the feedback ineffective. Second, increase the clarity of feedback in identifying and preparing specific examples of poor quality work, a lack of quantity, or inappropriate behavior in achieving the desired results. You must be prepared with the data or the facts. This is extremely important because the data serves as a touchstone for understanding which specific behavior does not yield results or yields the wrong results. Then, don't assume that the individual knows what good work or the right way looks like. You may need to explain or provide examples depending upon the individual in the conversation and their level of experience or expertise. Third, take the time to explain why. If you are asking someone to change their behavior, explaining why or the rationale for a change in performance helps the individual to clearly understand your expectations, as well as the positive consequences or outcomes of their behavior. Doing so also cuts down on the individual's tendency to make up data, negative interpretations, or wild assumptions about doing something they do not understand. Finally, maintain a future focus. Often when an individual's performance is lacking, some have a tendency to focus heavily on past mistakes or faults. By the time an individual has been beat up with their shortcomings, they can barely focus on what they need to do differently. Review the past as a touchstone for learning and moving forward, and then spend the rest of the time helping the person receiving the feedback to clearly understand what he or she will do differently going forward. Let's talk about using the DialogueWORKS process to complete the conversation guide in preparing to effectively improve employee performance. Let's assume that Amy, a fabulous administrative assistant, has typed a critical document for you in response to a major request made by your largest client. Amy completed the assignment as a rush job and met your deadline. However, as you read through the document, you discovered a number of spelling errors and word omissions. You need to hold a conversation with Amy to improve her performance, help her realize the importance of professionalism while maintaining respect in your relationship. How do we initiate? Initiation begins by describing the situation in this conversation with an effective attention check. The attention check is a statement of your intention and seeks to engage the listener in the conversation. Notice the difference in these two attention checks. I'd like to talk about how you blew this assignment. Can we talk about it? Versus, I'd like to talk about representing the company well. Can we talk about that? The attention check in this recipe should be either neutral or positive. Beginning the conversation on a positive note will help you engage your listener in the conversation while avoiding judgment and blame on your part. Once you have focused the listener's attention and engaged them, you are ready to describe the situation. Next, you will want to share the data or facts in the situation that are verifiable. There are a number of fact patterns in this recipe to consider. First, there are the facts of expectation or agreement versus what actually occurred. For example, you might say, "You agreed to be on time for our 8:30 a.m. meeting, yet you arrived at 9:45 a.m. Second, there are also the facts of behavior and the resulting consequences. For example, you might say, "The report wasn't completed on time, so I couldn't discuss our analysis of the data with the client. I had to schedule another meeting, and my boss gave me a verbal reprimand." Finally, there are the facts of the situation or event under discussion. For example, you might hear, "Everyone was 20 minutes late to the meeting, and when I asked for their feedback, everyone looked down and no one said a thing. I didn't know what to say next." In a conversation that is intended to change behavior, you will always want to address the agreed-upon expectations and the individual's actual behavior when trying to improve their performance. Next, you will want to share your interpretation of the data or the facts. Remember that your interpretation is the meaning that you assign to the facts or your experience. Sharing the data with your interpretation of that data allows the other person in conversation to see the logic of your thinking. It is extremely important to share an interpretation that gives the person the benefit of the doubt. For example, you might say, "You agreed to be on time for our 8:30 meeting, and you came at 9:45. I'm assuming that something came up that was beyond your control." Notice how much better that interpretation is than this one. I'm thinking that once again you really don't care about keeping your commitments. Sharing an interpretation such as that will create defensiveness. Remember that sharing interpretations that are put-downs usually lead to shut-downs, meaning that the individual won't open up and share what they are thinking. Or even worse, sometimes an accusatory interpretation will lead the person to blame you for their lack of performance. When this happens, it takes invariably more work to create an atmosphere of respect and dignity for both parties to return to a state of ease or rationality in holding the conversation. So in the case of Amy, you might share data and an interpretation that would sound like this. "You completed the typing of the document for our client on time. Before I mailed it to them, I read through and discovered a number of spelling errors and word omissions. I'm thinking that you were probably more focused on meeting my deadline and probably didn't take the time to proofread it sufficiently." Making such a statement allows the listener to understand the logic of your thinking while giving them the benefit of the doubt. Once you have shared an intention check, the data, and an interpretation, you are ready to engage in discovery. How do we discover? Discovery is about increasing your understanding. In this phase of the conversation, you want to confirm or disconfirm your interpretation by asking, "Is that true?" or "Is that the case?" Or you might want to simply ask open-ended questions to learn, such as, "What happened?" Open-ended questions typically begin with who, what, why, where, when, and how. Open-ended questions are more powerful because they require a response, and because you are not offering your listener something that they may interpret that you want to hear. Notice the difference. "I'm thinking you were more focused on meeting my deadline and probably didn't have time to proofread it sufficiently. Is that true?" Versus, "I'm thinking you were more focused on meeting my deadline and probably didn't have time to proofread it sufficiently. What happened?" Some leaders have indicated that they like open-ended questions when they believe the other person in the conversation may not answer truthfully, and when they want to increase the likelihood of a more honest response. In either case, you will always want to ask questions to learn, not to blame. After engaging in discovery, you are ready to move to connection. How do we connect? Connection is the phase of the conversation in which we summarize differences in values, clarify expectations in linking to desired goals, and share consequences. In order to do this effectively, you must listen to how your counterpart responds to your questions. Listen to how you might summarize differences, clarify expectations, and share consequences in the conversation. For example, "So, although I wanted the document turned around quickly and error-free, you focused on finishing the document by the deadline. Is that correct?" Notice this is the summary of different values. "We both agree that whatever document leaves our office should be done in the most professional manner." Notice this is the statement of expectations. "And that sending out a document with spelling errors or word omissions reflects on our credibility as a company. Here are the consequences. Don't you agree?" Notice you want to be specific about expectations and consequences, and you want to seek understanding for your statements by always ending in a question. Once you have completed this phase of the conversation, you are ready to move to building. How do we build? Building is the phase of the conversation for establishing accountability by finalizing the plan and gaining commitment. Your ability to finalize the plan may depend on the expertise and capability of the individual. If the individual doesn't possess the requisite skills to offer viable solutions, then you will need to be prepared to offer solutions and to explain why those solutions are what needs to be implemented. You will need to determine who will do what, by when, and follow up with them. On the other hand, if the individual possesses the expertise, then allow them to offer a number of solutions and to select a solution with your approval. This will increase buy-in and the likelihood that the solution will be implemented. After agreeing on a solution, depending on the individual, their history, and the situation, you might want to review the natural consequences of non-performance, as well as any consequences that you will impose if they fail to keep their commitments. Then you are ready to gain the individual's commitment. Gaining commitment requires that you ask a number of questions to ensure that the person is committed to the desired course of action. You might want to ask some of the following questions. Can you do this? Will you do this? What challenges could get in the way? If that happens, will you consult me immediately? Will you tell me when my expectations can't be met? Is there anything else we need to discuss? Be sure to ask as many questions as necessary to finally establish that this person will perform in the agreed-upon manner. Then, read the individual's reaction to your questions. If you have any suspicion that the individual will not be able to meet their commitments, then ask them to share their concerns and deal with their objections. And above all, if they ask questions you can't answer, tell them you'll find out the answers and then follow up. Let's summarize. In the initiation phase, you begin with an attention check to engage your listener. Then you share the data. Remember, there are 3 kinds of data or facts: the facts of expectation versus occurrence, the facts of behavior and resulting consequences, and the facts of the situation. Then share your interpretation of the data. Next, you either want to ask to confirm or ask to learn by using open-ended questions. Then, in connection, you will want to summarize any differences in values, clarify expectations, and share consequences. Finally, in the building phase, you will want to finalize the plan for going forward and gain commitment. Taking the time to complete the DialogueWORKS Planner and the Conversation Guide will help you to hold a conversation that will improve the employee's performance, increase respect and trust, and achieve the results that you desire. That's what DialogueWORKS is all about. Conversations that work. Best of luck.